Good evening. I'm David Fink. I just have a couple of quick announcements before we get into our programming. As you know, tonight's event is to talk about services and supports for transgender youth and their families. Before we get into the conversation about the services, we thought it would be important to talk a little bit about Senate Bill 150. I'll give you a very quick example that some of you have heard. I was on a call with providers from around the state about 6 or 8 weeks ago, and providers were talking about the fact that, and these are mental health providers, who were turning kids away from treatment, from gender-affirming care, because they were concerned about their licenses as social workers, psychologists, professional counselors. So we thought that an important piece that we should talk about tonight is to give ourselves a little bit of understanding of what Senate Bill 150 actually does. Corey Shapiro, who is an attorney with the American Civil Liberties Union of Kentucky, and also, I'm proud to say, a board member of Jewish Family and Career Services, is going to talk through that piece of legislation with us and a little bit about what the ACLU is doing with that legislation. So I'll start with Corey. Thank you all.
Hi, everyone. As David mentioned, I'm the legal director at the ACLU of Kentucky. I'm also very proud to be a board member of Jewish Family and Career Services. We have an amazing panel tonight, and David asked me first to just sort of give a little overview of what is happening here in Kentucky with respect to laws that are targeting transgender youth in Kentucky. It's been a really hard year, and obviously it's been hard for a very long time for transgender youth here in Kentucky, but this year in particular, SB 150 was a very cruel attack on transgender youth in Kentucky. So SB 150 has 4 sections in it. The first 3 relate to education components and directly how school boards can and educators can address transgender youth and their rights as well as curriculum issues. And then section 4 relates to the health care that can be provided to transgender youth. So first of all, let me get and right now, the ACLU of Kentucky is challenging section 4, the health care ban, which will go into effect if a judge doesn't stop it from going into effect on June 29th. And we have a motion in federal court that is asking a judge to go ahead and stop that from going forward. The judge is aware of it. We are very hopeful, nothing's a slam dunk, but we are very hopeful that the judge will agree with us, and as well as the Department of Justice, which entered a statement of interest, agreeing that under the federal government's view, SB 150 Section 4 is unconstitutional under the Equal Protection Clause. So we are hopeful that the judge will agree and will find that the law should not go into effect on June 29th. So stay tuned for that. The other 3 sections, I'm going to go through each of them just very briefly because there are some misconceptions about what that does, what those provisions do. Section 1 involves the use of pronouns. And so what it does is it allows, it prohibits the Department of Education on a statewide basis and school boards from recommending that educators in their school districts use the pronouns that the students want them to use. It does not require them to misgender any student. It also requires them not to discipline a teacher. I call it the let mean teachers, I use other words sometimes, but we're being videotaped, be mean teachers. And so that's what it does. If a teacher does not want to be nice to their students and wants to misgender their students, they can go ahead and do that. They were probably going to do that anyway. They probably weren't going to be the nicest teachers to those kids. And that's the reality and the sad reality we have. But it just prohibits the school district from enforcing or taking any disciplinary action for that type of teacher. Section 2 deals with curriculum and what types of curriculum can be implemented in a school district and the amount of discussion about sexual orientation and gender identity in that curriculum. It doesn't completely prohibit it, it simply changes the focus, and you're going to see in some school districts that's going to be implemented differently than in Jefferson County. And so we're going to see different ways that that's implemented, and we're going to be following that and monitoring to make sure that students are able to receive the type of education that they want to receive, and that they still are able to learn everything that they can learn and that they want to learn. And then Section 3 addresses bathrooms, and what it does is it prohibits a school from requiring or allowing a student to use a bathroom that is not consistent with the bathroom that they choose to use. It does not prohibit a school district from making accommodations to students who want to have various accommodations for the bathrooms that they want to use, but it does prohibit them from actually using a bathroom that is not consistent with the gender that's assigned at birth. And so we are trying to figure out how to navigate those situations. It is not a slam dunk issue. It's not something that would immediately allow for litigation. We're investigating that possibility. What we ask is that if you are trying to navigate these situations, reach out to us. We can't take on every litigation. We can't make any promises that there isn't a viable claim on all of these cases. But we do want to hear from you. We do want to understand. We are developing tools, both with our national ACLU and internally, on how best to navigate these situations, because it's not easy. It is designed to be difficult. It's designed to be vague and confusing and hard. It's designed to make things confusing so that David gets calls from social workers around the state thinking they can't even offer services, which is absolutely not true. It's also not true that you have to misgender a student. That is not true, but there are misconceptions about that out there. So, we are here as a support. We are looking at possible litigation. We can't sue everything. And I can't get too much into litigation strategy here, especially if it's being recorded. But if you do have specific policy concerns about policies at your school district level, please, we may be able to provide some assistance to help you navigate those circumstances with your school board. We do find that there are school boards that want to help but feel as though they are constrained by this law, and if there are ways that we can help navigate that as lawyers or as an advocacy organization, there may be ways that we can do that. It's not always the best. The courts are not always going to save us, and litigation is not always the best method. So just a brief issue about Section 4 before I pass it on to this amazing panel, or back to David to introduce this amazing panel. What Section 4 does do, the healthcare ban, it only requires that a license be revoked for a medical provider who administers or prescribes puberty blockers or hormone therapy. That's it. Nothing else. What a mental health care worker provides in terms of support, in terms of therapy, all of those services are completely uncovered by this bill. So it will not impact any other services other than puberty blockers and hormone therapy, if for some reason this court doesn't go along with that. So, please, that's one of the misconceptions that's out there. But what we are doing is making sure that trans youth in Kentucky are able to continue to receive this medically necessary care of puberty blockers and hormone therapy in Kentucky. So we are hopeful that that case will continue to be successful and that the law will not go into effect. With that, I'm going to pass it on to David, and if anybody has any questions, I'll be here. You can talk to me afterwards. I'm happy to discuss and answer any questions you have. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for supporting JFCS. And thanks, David.
Thanks, Corey. So let me give a little rundown of the events tonight. So I'm going to do a brief introduction about myself and JFCS. We'll then have a panel discussion. We have some prepared questions for the panelists, some of which they've been prepared, some of they've given in advance, and some of which I get to ask without warning them ahead of time. It makes it more fun for me. Then we'll have an opportunity to have questions from the audience, and all of that will pack into the next 75 minutes, okay? And it'll be a great conversation, a very important conversation. So, as I said, I'm David Fink. I did not say that I'm the CEO of Jewish Family and Career Services, and I welcome you all into our home today. Jewish Family and Career Services is a social services agency that serves the Jewish community and represents the Jewish community, but just as importantly, serves the entire Louisville community. So we serve everyone in our community regardless of race, gender, or identity. We have several lines of service that I think are important for you all to hear about quickly. One is our older adult program that helps evaluate and serve individuals so that they can age at home gracefully and supports their family members in that effort. We have our career services program that provides micro-lending for marginalized communities and business advising for marginalized communities. It also provides career services for individuals and a new program that provides career opportunities and career readiness for youth aged 15 to 30. We also have our case management and family stability program, which involves our food pantry, which you all passed on the way down, which if you did not take a look at it, please at another time be sure to look at our food pantry, which is a Dare to Care food pantry sponsored by the Meyer family. And it's unique in Louisville in that it's a choice pantry where people can come and shop as if they're in a grocery store and pick their items. So it's fairly unique in that way. And then we also have case management services that are tied to our family stability so that we have financial supports for our clients, for our staff if necessary, but financial supports for our clients and some financial education for our clients. And lastly, but not least importantly, is our clinical services where we have testing services, therapeutic services, and our support services that include support groups, such as a support group for substance use, but also, an important and relevant to tonight, is a support group for families and caregivers of transgender youth. And that is part of what brought us to this conversation tonight. Enough about JFCS and enough about me. You're here to hear from our panelists. So let me first introduce our panelists. Immediately to my right is Melissa Roth. Melissa brings more than 18 years of experience providing both individual and group counseling in various settings. Melissa joined Jewish Family and Career Services as a therapist in December 2020 after moving to Louisville from Chicago, Illinois. There she supported students, families, and staff as a social worker in a high-performing middle school. Melissa helped lead a district-wide transformation to positive behavior intervention and supports, also known as PBIS, Jefferson County has that as well, a philosophy that resulted in new classroom management styles, improved school culture, and reduced disciplinary incidents. At JFCS, Melissa is a therapist and has started a support group for parents and caregivers of transgender youth, which began last year, and that began because she was hearing from multiple families that there was a need within our community. Melissa earned a master's in social work from the Jane Addams College of Social Work, the University of Illinois at Chicago in 1999, and a bachelor's of arts in 1997 from the University of Denver in Colorado. In her free time, Melissa enjoys playing tennis and spending time outside with her husband and her 2 children. Welcome, Melissa. Dr. Karen Abrams. Dr. Karen Abrams is a Louisville native. She's a pediatrician in private practice with Kaplan, Barron. She has a special interest in serving adolescents and sees lots of teenage girls. She's a past president of the Jewish community of Louisville and is currently the board vice president for the Jewish Heritage Fund. She and her husband, Dr. Jeff Glazer, have 3 adult children, one of whom is trans. Senator Karen Berg. State Senator Karen Berg is a physician and professor who also serves in the Kentucky State Senate representing the 26th District, where she is a lifelong resident. She was elected to the Kentucky State Senate as a Democrat in December 2020. Dr. Berg is a diagnostic radiologist, has practiced for over 30 years. She is also an assistant professor in the Department of Radiology in the University of Louisville. And for those of you who are not aware, Dr. Berg is a phenomenal advocate for trans youth, for LGBTQI plus youth, as well as for women's rights and particularly reproductive rights in Kentucky. That wasn't in there, but I think it needs to be said. Stuart Gerard Walker is the programming coordinator at Sweet Evening Breeze. They are a Louisville native and have years of experience in local nonprofit management. Stuart's mission is to provide low barrier programs to LGBTQ plus youth that foster a sense of pride, empowerment, compassion, and self-esteem that can carry over into adulthood. Welcome to all of you. So let me go ahead and get this started. Dr. Abrams, I'm going to begin with you. And what we will be doing today is that I've asked all the panelists, as I ask a question, for them to be thinking about this, because even though we live in a world of intersectionality And you heard that today, right? We have a pediatrician who has a trans youth. We have a parent of a trans youth who is also a state senator. We have a provider of services who themselves has lived experiences. We have everyone on our panel, and for that matter, myself and probably most of you in this room, have more than one relationship to this topic. What will be important, though, is that we hear from their voices. And so as we ask questions, the question may be phrased one way initially, but I will probably be rephrasing it so that each individual has an opportunity to give us some of that feedback from their voice. So now, Dr. Abrams, I'll start with you. In a pediatrician's practice, how could the pediatrician support transgender youth and their families in their practice?
So children and adolescents want to be loved and respected for who they are, and the vast majority of young children are colorblind, race blind, and gender blind. So trans youth, it's very varied. It can present early in life, it can present in middle school. It's very common to explore, not to wonder about gender, and sexual orientation is totally different than gender. But gender is the sex you identify with, or non-binary or fluid, and sexual orientation is who you're attracted to. So the way that we are trying to be respectful of our patients. So sometimes some patients will want to use different pronouns. We have electronic medical records now, so we put that in the chart so anyone that deals with that patient sees what pronoun they prefer. The same thing with, we call it alternative name. Lots of kids have nicknames or preferred names, so we put their preferred name. And we do our best. And kids and teens, they just want you to try and respect them. So occasionally I'll flub up and use the wrong pronoun, or, but I'd say, I'm sorry, and they're fine. They know that you're trying. It's when people disrespect them, like what the majority of our legislatures have done, and they see social media and they see the newspaper and they say, Mom, why do they hate me? If you just replace a word in the legislation, instead of trans, it could say Jewish or Christian, or you have red hair, and you put yourself in their shoes and see how they feel. So we're doing our best. The other thing is that it's so varied. That's why a legislature, you can't pass rules when it's medically and mentally very varied when a child might want to transition, whether just with the clothes they wear or puberty blockers or, et cetera. And so what we can do is we refer them to the Page Clinic, okay? I'm not an expert in puberty blockers and things, so we are very lucky in Kentucky to have the Page Clinic, which started in 2015, and I want to get it exactly right. It's a pediatric and adolescent gender education program. It offers medical and mental health support for individuals whose genders differ from their sex assigned at birth. So they have a team, right, of endocrinologists, who are the medical doctors that do the puberty, behavioral specialists, mental health professionals, and social workers who work with families in a care plan that meets the children where they are. So you can't legislate that. You can't say, at age 12 or age 16, I've been in practice 35 years, Dr. Berg's 30, I don't want some usually older, usually white, usually male, usually Republican, non-medical person tell me how to practice medicine. So there you are. So that's how you do it.
So, Senator Berg, from your perspective and thinking about, Henry started the journey fairly young in middle school. Can you speak to what you would have liked, and maybe you did receive this, but what you and Henry would have liked to have heard from your pediatrician?
Well, when my son came out, there weren't a whole lot of providers in this city.
Yes.
In fact, we really had trouble finding any knowledgeable providers. But, we're at, the medicine is evolving. And like in my child's case, my child didn't come out to me as being trans until after he had gone through puberty, after he had developed severe gender dysphoria, and after 2 years of self-harm and really severe mental anxiety that we couldn't even figure out where it was coming from to begin with. Obviously, we had, a therapist, we had psychiatrists, we had therapists, we had our doctors, but he didn't have the words. He wasn't able to tell us until he got older and he heard the words and he got online and he learned about this. If he had been able to have the words before puberty, what we have the option of doing, what we have the ability to do, if this is what a patient and their family desires, is we can stop a child from going through the puberty that does not correspond with their gender preference. And if you can stop that, and you can put them through basically the correct puberty, you're saving, from my perspective, to really the most difficult part of being trans. One is that dysphoria when the child looks at themselves in the mirror. In my child's case, I had to take all the mirrors out of my kid's room. My kid did not want to see a female body when he knew inside he was male. And it was puberty that we started having the serious mental problems with self-harm. So you could prevent that. The other thing, guys, and this is honestly my opinion, but it is supported by a lot of, I believe, medical professionals and trans people. What is so difficult is never being seen by other people the way you see yourself. That is what, honestly, over time, I think, breaks down your will and eventually leads to suicidality. So if we have the ability to fix that, if we have the ability so that when you sit down at a restaurant and somebody takes your order, they gender you appropriately. You don't have to 100 times a day be reminded that you don't quite fit in with the world. And if we can stop that just with medicine, guys, hormones. How many people in this room would object to us prescribing insulin for a diabetic child? Of course, that's what we would do. There is no difference. If you can mitigate the long-term harm, why wouldn't you?
Thank you. So Dr. Berg, or Senator Berg, I go back and forth, and Dr. Abrams, you both touched on several pieces there, and we're going to come back to a lot of that. I want to take the same question, though, to Stuart about your experience and ask you what either you did hear or would have liked to have heard from your pediatrician.
So I didn't come out as trans until my freshman year of college, so I had already passed puberty. and I also consider myself non-binary. So my experience is vastly different from some of the trans women I know or some of the trans men I know. All of our experiences are different. So I can't say what I wished my pediatrician had done because I didn't know that's what I was dealing with as a kid. But I think I can say what I wish my parents would have done, and that is to allow me, and in ways they did allow me to explore my identity, but I wish that they had talked to me about it. So they let me dress however I wanted. They let me play with the toys I wanted. But they never had a conversation when I expressed to them, Mom and Dad, something is different. Like, I noticed that the girls at school are getting Barbie dolls for their Christmas gifts, and the boys are getting these little wound up trucks, and I want the truck and I'm getting the Barbie doll. I wish they would have just explored that with me more. So, and then had we gotten there, maybe I would have been able to talk to a pediatrician about it. But unfortunately, I lack that experience of having gone through that. So.
Thank you. Melissa, from a therapist perspective, is there something that you would recommend that and maybe it's what's already been said, but is there something you would recommend that the pediatricians be thinking about?
Well, I mean, I definitely think, I know when you take your child to the pediatrician, they have you fill out, and I don't know what age this happens, where you fill out sort of how you're feeling about depression. They ask you, and your parent is sitting right next to you. So I don't know if there's ever an opportunity for a parent or a child to be separated and or the parent to step out if there's ever an opportunity, if something is a red flag. Because I don't think that a lot of children feel if they haven't come out to their parents, they're not going to come out to their parents in front of their pediatrician. So if there's ever an opportunity for them to ask questions privately away from the parents, or fill out those questionnaires online versus in the office with their parents sitting next to them.
Thank you. So I'm gonna change the order of questions here for a minute, because I've already heard several terms kind of thrown about, and I want to point out to you all as guests that at your seats you have what they call a card rack, which is a list of definitions that we pulled from the Human Rights Commission as relevant definitions. But one of the pieces that's important, I think definitions give us a nice kind of setting and foundation, but kind of, Stuart, as you put it, it's different. A definition is not who a person is, right? And not everybody sees themselves as binary or non-binary. Some people see themselves as genderqueer. Some people see themselves as gay or straight or what have you. So we have this list of definitions, and I just want to throw out to the panel, if there are any definitions that we have on this list now that you all want to comment on from your own experience, and I know I've shared some with some of you, for example, my niece, similar to what Stuart referred to, my niece's spouse does not, refers to themselves as genderqueer, does not prefer to themselves as non-binary. So is there anything in there that you all would like to specifically comment on? And again, we might have questions from the audience at the end about those terms, but I just want to see if there's anything that you all want to comment on, since we've been throwing definitions out about.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about gender dysphoria, because it's actually something that I think is, for those of you who know, there's a clinical diagnosis of gender dysphoria. It's in the DSM-5, which is where clinicians or physicians will diagnose a child. And not all transgender children, adolescents or adults, experience gender dysphoria. So you could experience, distress in some way, but it doesn't necessarily meet criteria for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. But for a lot of children, that's the only way they get treated, is if they have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, which you had mentioned here is clinically significant distress caused when a person's assigned birth gender is not the same as the one with which they identify. But that can show up in a variety of different ways, whether it's a strong dislike for their own sexual anatomy, or with young children, it could just be they don't like playing with the toys that are assigned, that sort of aligns with their gender assigned at birth. But for older teens, it's the physical, trying to hide, for females, trying to hide in big baggy shirts, for breast development or facial hair, for males or bathing suits. I think there's a lot that children and adolescents experience with gender dysphoria, but not everyone who is transgender has gender dysphoria. And I think that's an important piece because it's a DSM
Right.
diagnosis, it comes out as a mental disorder, which I think we all agree is not aligned with a lot of our experiences.
So let's stay with that for a minute, because I think you often hear conversations about mental illness in the transgender population. And as Senator Berg referred to it, the elephant in the room, right, is suicide. And there was a recent article that I reviewed that across 4 different countries, the average rate of suicide ideation and sometimes attempts is about 50% of youth who identify as transgender, which is far, far beyond what the average rates are. So let's talk about this definition that makes it sound like there's a mental illness versus the youth you love and the youth you care for and who you are, and how we come to terms with that a little bit. And
I'll
Melissa, never mind, Karen, go ahead. Dr. Berg, or Senator Berg, go ahead.
I will start with that because, obviously this is a topic I have thought long and hard about. And I walked hand in hand, for 10 years with a child who was, for many of those years, not all of them, but for many of those years, actively suicidal. So the question becomes, is it a chicken? Is it an egg? What, where are we? I will tell you this, from my own personal experience, I had an absolutely happy, healthy child until puberty. Up until puberty, I had a happy, healthy child. And I personally think that the suicidality is secondary. I do not think that trans people intrinsically are mentally ill or have a higher rate of wanting to kill themselves than other people do. I think it is their lived experience that ultimately can break you, and that's the truth. When you are disrespected, and sometimes, like in schools now, we are going to be allowing our teachers to intentionally disrespect trans children. There is a good article that says if you get support, either at school, at work, or at home, in any one of those 3 groups, your suicidality as a whole decreases 70%. What's interesting and what I think is really sad about this particular subject is that support from your classmates doesn't change how your rate of suicidality. It is support from your employer, your school, or your home. It has to be from adults, because what these people are mostly looking for is just to fit in. Just to go around your normal life, your normal day, your normal way, and not be demeaned, not be diminished, not be excluded, not be, and over the years, and then, there's also violence. A lot of people will actually be physically violent with trans people. And that all adds up to the point where you just feel like it's time to give up. And that's what I think we as physicians can really, really help with, is help people to feel comfortable in their own skin. And for each person, that will be different. That does not necessarily mean you need hormone blockers and you need exogenous hormones. But it may. It depends on who you are and what you need. And for me, I mean, the real room for growth here is that some of these children have the language young enough that we can trust them, we can intervene, and we can make, if nothing else, guys, and this is going to sound really sad, we can make their lives safer. We can make the world safer for them just by how they look.
Thank you. Melissa, Dr. Abrams, Stuart, talking about the diagnosis, about gender dysphoria, is there anything that you want to add to, I mean, that was a beautiful summary in many ways. Is there anything you want to add from your experiences, as a lived experience of a pediatrician, or please, Dr. Abrams.
So, like I said, I've been in practice 35 years. So, like 30 years ago, they didn't teach us this in medical school, and we would have, very, like 1 or 2 patients that now I realize had gender dysphoria, and we didn't really know how to help them. And if we had allowed, and their parent, if we'd had enough knowledge to tell them to let them dress, sometimes it's just dressing, okay?
Just social transition.
And now we didn't have the Page Clinic until 2015, so I would send patients to Cincinnati because they had a multi-specialty clinic. So now there is a very small subset of children that have the words and know at a young age, and if allowed to dress their preferred gender, you all would not realize that they weren't their gender assigned at birth, and those children are very happy. Now, I'll just talk personally for 1 second, because my son didn't come out till he graduated art school, and as a parent, I wasn't the best, okay? I'd known him for 23 years as his birth name, and I had a really hard time. And it took me years. I mean, you go through a journey, grief, and because I didn't want him to do anything permanent because I didn't know if he was sure. But I have to say, now that he's done some transitioning, he's the happiest. He had mental health issues for a very long time, but I don't think we knew all of it. So I asked him the other day, Ash, did you know at a young age, because what did you think what did you think? And he said, I wasn't a boy, I wasn't a girl, I was just me. So I think that's pretty telling, But what Dr. Berg said, we do know more, and we have the resources, and we can let these children transition. Not all of them do hormone blockers. Again, it's complicated, but their mental health can be fine. It's if they're bullied, they're not respected at school, not allowed to do whatever they and their families want on their journey, causes the mental health issues. It's not a mental illness. So.
Thank you. Stuart or Melissa, or should we want to move on? Okay. I'm going to give Melissa the first bite of this next question. Stuart, I know you're going to want to comment on this, because we've had this. We just had this conversation. When I think about adolescence in particular, but our youth, it's a period of discovery of self, right? And most of us think of adolescence also as a time of where your personality and recognizing who you are kind of coalesces, and it takes time, right? So speak to us a little bit about the difference between a youth who is on their identity pursuit, not necessarily gender identity, but their identity's pursuit, and a transgender youth. As a clinician, as a youth voice, maybe as a parent, as a pediatrician, and I'm going to start with you, Melissa, what do you look for and how do you know what the difference is? And what's the key to discovering that difference?
Well, I think it's very typical in child development for children to explore their gender identity and try to figure out for themselves what it means to be a boy, what it means to be a girl, or not necessarily a binary at all. But I think, we've all seen children, sort of go from one to the other, and sometimes people will say, oh, it's just a phase, and they grow out of it. And I think the main, the most telling way to know whether it's a phase, as some people would say, or in fact, it is, their child is transgender, are three things. One is they are insistent, consistent, and persistent, meaning that they, over time, are very, open about their journey in the sense that, like, this is who I am. And it happens, might happen, for a short period of time, but I think the children that at a young age are very insistent, persistent, and consistent about who they are, and our children will tell us. I think what happens is if they try to tell us and we aren't listening, it can either become suppressed at a young age and then say, they tried to express it and somehow it got shut down and they're feeling, oh, I can't do that. That's not a safe space for me. So then it either will come out later, or for some children or adolescents, it was never something that they had considered until they started puberty. And that's when for them, whether it's, exposure to other peers and they're starting to explore as an adolescent, I think that's a key time again for them to process and explore. But I think that those three phrases, like I said, insistent, persistent, and consistent, is the difference between a phase and this is something that's real. And I know Stuart's going to talk a little bit about their journey, but I do think for those that come out at a younger age or even in adolescence, that they feel that they have a safe space, then those children or adolescents will communicate that, whether it's through words or behavior, dress, et cetera.
Thank you. Stuart, go with it, man.
So I was reading this question earlier today, just trying to prepare for the panel, and initially I thought, if Melissa says that there is a difference between gender identity exploration and identity exploration in general, I'm going to disagree with that. But hearing you talk about it, I don't disagree. I think I'm coming from a philosophical perspective, and what I'm asking is, why do we stop exploring at a certain age? Like, why are there some children that are more persistent about their identities than others? And I have to ask, is it that those children that are not pursuing going through phases over and over again or being persistent, is that because they're getting the message that at some point they have to have their identity figured out? I don't want there to be a misconception that you have to decide and you have to stick with something, that you have to stick with whatever you land on at a certain moment. I, being non-binary, have had this issue, and it has been the hardest issue to deal with for me as a non-binary person. What does masculinity mean? What does femininity mean? And the truth is, they don't mean anything. They mean what they mean to you. So for some reason, I can't explain this, but when my hair is grown out, I feel more masculine. I don't think that that's typical for many people. I don't think many people see masculinity as, I think that people see long hair as feminine typically. And so I got older and I started exploring what those things meant, and I started exploring femininity and realized that this is an ongoing journey for me. I'm not stopping at one point forever. My whole entire life, I'm going to be going through phases. And I think the confusion comes from people telling me that I need to settle on something, or maybe not people telling me, but I'm getting that message.
Assumption.
So, yeah, so let's go right there. And Dr. Abrams, you had a very poignant moment where you talked about maybe you weren't always the perfect mother, right?
Oh,
And
sure.
and that the road, it's a road, right? And there's some challenges in that road. So I'd like to go right where you're discussing, which is that, so as a parent, or as a therapist, or as a pediatrician/parent, or as someone with lived experience, what are the opportunities and what are the challenges that you see as a parent or with lived experiences when you're trying to have that conversation with a parent? I mean, how do we work on receiving those messages more openly from our youth, even within the family? Because I think, Senator Berg, your point about the research is very poignant, right? So that yes, gender affirming is the answer, and being non-judgmental and accepting as a culture is the answer. But even before we get to the culture within the family, we have to keep working at that. So what are some of the challenges and opportunities in those conversations?
I can speak to the opportunities. I think a lot of time when we're talking about these issues, we are looking at transgender identities through a lens of like deficiency, and we're asking, what can we do to support the transgender community? What do they need from us? And the truth is, what do you all need from me to understand that, like, you should be exploring your identity? And if you do, I think you'll understand a little bit, you can develop that compassion and that empathy, and you'll understand what we need. Because this is not a transgender issue, this is a humanity issue.
Agreed.
This is shame. People don't explore their identities because they feel like they can't. It's not that people don't want to, it's that they can't. And being transgender just means that you're accepting that journey, and you're just gonna explore. That's just what being transgender means. So when I think about opportunities, I think instead of always having a discussion about dysphoria, why aren't we having discussions about euphoria? Why aren't we celebrating the identities instead of constantly talking about, you know, what we need, what's missing? I think what I needed from my parents that I didn't get, and my parents are great, but they're not perfect. They were always accepting, but they never celebrated my exploration. So I think an opportunity that we're missing is not only saying to our children, you can explore, but saying you should explore, and we should do that together, and we should celebrate that and have fun with it. I think we talk a lot about like the negatives of being transgender and the consequences in our society of being transgender, and I think there needs to be more emphasis on the fun part and the beautiful part. The conversation I have with other trans people is always more enlightening and more interesting than the conversations I have with cis people, because I think there's just a deeper understanding of identity and non-judgment that comes along with those fun conversations. And I think the opportunity that we're missing is talking about euphoria and the other side of being transgender that we don't often hear about.
Anybody else want to?
I would agree, actually. There's a lot being written and talked about trans joy, and even just for the gay community, joy in who you are, and joy in how you live your life, and to me, honestly, that's why Pride is so important, because it allows family and friends and people to get together and be happy and be open and welcoming and loving and supportive in a way that you just don't get all the time, every day. So to me, that's, it's a very important part of why I think Pride and Pride Month is so important. But you're right, there's a lot of room for joy that we have not been acknowledging. We need to work on that.
Dr. Abrams or Melissa, do you?
Well, that's a very good point, Stuart, because I hadn't thought of that. As a parent, at first I have to be honest, what will people think?
Yeah.
Okay. But second was fear. Like, they're going to be bullied. They're going to be discriminated against. This is a hard path. You want your child, to have an easy path, and it's not an easy path. And so that was a lot of my struggle, especially, I'm probably the oldest one on the panel by a few years, but we grew up, it was so heterogeneous about everything. Everything was white and heterosexual, and I'm not saying it was good. My friend that was gay came out to me when he was 40. People were very repressed. And so it's kind of hard to change your mindset when you grow up that repressed. So I'm trying.
Yeah.
I guess the thing I would add in terms of the importance of community, because as a, non-binary or trans adult, you've found your people. And I think for children who are school age, where they might be the only trans kid at their school, or a parent who might feel that they're the only one dealing with it, is if you can find your community, then you can have your joy. But I think for a lot of people, it is sort of a community that isn't easy to find. I know for a lot of people, there's Facebook groups for everything, but there's a lot of fear of putting yourself out there and being identified because of all the hate and the bullying that's gone on. So I think if you can find that community, you can experience that joy. But I think there is still a lot of people, whether they're young children or young adolescents, where they are the only in their school, the only in their town, in their family, in their church, for whatever reason, that they haven't found their community. And I think if we can connect people, have more visibility, have more community groups, support groups for not just children. I know, Louisville Youth Group has a fabulous group for children and adolescents, and obviously we have our support group here. But I do think if we can find that community for people, they can experience the positive aspects of being non-binary or trans or gender creative in general, and just feel accepted.
Right.
So-
I can't imagine being out in the state. Seriously, because
Right.
Louisville is the liberal hate, there are, like you said, in a small town, I would think you would be the only one. That would be really difficult.
Well, let me just jump in here because, my experience, I get to meet people out in the state because, I'm up in Frankfurt, and so they come to us. Historically, a lot of trans people didn't want anybody to know that they were trans. It has been very, very difficult for some of the older people in this state who have lived their lives essentially quietly dressing and acting and going about the way they think that they should, and most people don't know that if you undress them, their genitalia may not be concordant to what the hair looks like. But what we've actually required recently, and this is sad, adult trans people have been required to come out of the closet to protect the children. Because now that the children have the language, see what happened, guys, the kids didn't have the language. The language was not there. We weren't taught it in medical school. Nobody, it just didn't exist. But now that it exists, and we have children as young as 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, telling us this is them. Well, at that point, the adults who have been very quietly trying to live their lives without anybody bothering them feel an obligation. They feel like we have got to stand up and protect these kids. So we have trans people throughout the state that are coming out at the age of 50 and 60 and 70 years old because they feel like they have to. It's not what they want to do. It is not what they should be required to do. If that's not what they want to do, they shouldn't have to do it. But we've got this world now where politics and medicine are really forcing people's hands.
And that reminds me, actually, there's a recent study that 2% of youth identify as transgender youth, which is about a 100% increase from where it was 6 or 7 years ago.
1%.
And, right, it was 1%. And just in that short amount of time, the numbers have doubled, which, is that because we're allowing it? No, it's because, people, it's because we are having those conversations, and those conversations are allowed. So far we've been talking, and there's some things that have really struck me from each of you. I think the notion of the joy and admiring the joy and embracing the journey. I think the notion of the importance of community, the importance of recognizing as a parent that, and as a pediatrician for that matter, that you're not going to be perfect. And that it's not necessarily embracing the joy of the journey, but it's recognizing the journey and the importance of that. And insistent, persistent, and consistent, I think are really a nice way to be thinking about this. But I want to come back particularly to the notion of community. And Louisville likes to think of itself as a welcoming community. And so, how welcoming are we? But more importantly, what can we do to be more welcoming? What do allies and what does the community need to do to be more welcoming and supportive of transgender youth? Melissa, do you want to start? Go ahead.
Sure. I think with what's coming up, what Corey had mentioned earlier about, the fight that's going to happen as far as the school districts go, go to your school board meetings. I think it hasn't been decided what's going to happen yet. We know that the law goes into effect June 29th, but we don't know how it's going to actually present itself. So I feel like, if you have children in school, or even if you don't, you can go to your school board and have a voice and show support, because I think we know that the school board will have to listen if there's enough people who are saying this is what we want or this is what we think is the right thing to do.
Thank you. Dr. Abrams?
We've got to change the legislature. Slowly but surely. So we need some people to run for office like Dr. Berg, and we need to vote. We need any of our children that are of age to vote, because we've got to vote these people out. Hopefully they'll realize that this thing that speaks to them is money. This is going to kill our economy. No sane company's going to want to come. No doctors are going to want to come practice in Kentucky when legislatures can tell you what to do. My adult child doesn't want to come visit, so we're losing, so we've got to change the legislature. Louisville, there are things we can do. I'm not being light of that, but that's a huge issue. We've got to start like the conservatives did for 30 years. It's not going to take us that long, I hope, but we've got to start going to school boards and convincing people to run for office and voting to get these people out. So,
Senator Berg, do you?
I would reiterate that, and I would say, honestly, the problem is not Jefferson County, and the problem is not Fayette County. The problem is who we are electing in our more rural districts. And anybody who knows anybody who lives in the state and who has, voting or influence, you need to be reaching out. You need to be, honestly, what each of us needs to be willing to do right now to fix this is to get in a car and drive 2.5 hours and knock doors for 10 hours and then go to sleep and get up and do it again. And make sure that the voters in this state know who they are electing and what they are voting for. Because most of us are privileged enough that we don't have to pay attention. It doesn't matter to us. It doesn't, I was a political science major. My thesis was the reason people didn't vote is because it didn't matter who was in charge. There was enough cohesiveness in our society that things didn't really change that much if there was a Democrat or if there was a Republican. But we are now to the point, guys, unequivocally, it matters tremendously. Vote, get everybody you know to vote, pay attention, write letters, shame these guys. Literally, they are human beings. Every person in this room should be writing Max Wise a letter and saying, you referred to me or my child or my family member as a distraction in the classroom that you are going to fix by not requiring people to support our children, even with a doctor's note. Even if I had a note from a physician saying it is important for my child's health and well-being that you refer to him by the pronouns that he wants. Everybody in this room should be writing Max Wise a letter and saying you should be ashamed, and everybody in this room should be writing Danny Carroll a letter and saying we are so proud of you as the single Republican in the Senate who stood up at the end and said, wait a second, guys, we are making a mistake here. He stood up against his whole party, and let me tell you, he will pay for it. But that's the type of thing we need to do. These are actual people. They run for re-election. Make them accountable.
Okay. Stuart, and then I have one last question before and so get ready, folks. I have one question after this, and we're going to turn it over to the group. So what do you think we need to do to support our youth?
Well, to the question of is Louisville welcoming, the answer is no. No offense, hate politics. So I don't have anything to add to that about legislature, but I can share with you my experience day to day walking down the street, and I will say that I'm very, very privileged to be able to pass as a cisgender person in most circles. A cisgender person will see this little mustache and say that's a normal man. But another non-binary or transgender person will see this and go, that's a trans man. That wimpy little mustache. I love that. But I was having this conversation with another non-binary friend, and we felt, because I was on testosterone, that I was being pushed into masculinity, and I use masculinity as a safety net. It's easier to walk down the street with this mustache being perceived as a cisgender man because I know that that's safe for me. But when I wake up in the morning, sometimes I look at my clothes and they're all masculine, and I think I'm gonna be respected today because of these clothes, but these are not the clothes I wanna wear today. I want to wear this crop top that my partner just bought, or these shoes with heels on them. But I don't, because Louisville's not welcoming, and I push myself into a binary for that reason.
And I'm sorry to hear that, and I apologize on behalf of Louisville to say that. But I will also say this to you, that something you just said, I think bears sort of a reflective moment, which is that you just described how you are absolutely no different than any other human being in our world who wants to be seen and appreciated for who they are versus what they're wearing on the outside or what smile they put on their face at that moment. And I think, again, that's part of the conversation that we need to remember, is that we're all the same in that way.
I want to add to that, just speaking on privilege. I do pass in most circles as a cis white man, and I get benefits of that. And I want to take this time to acknowledge that everyone on this panel is white, and most of us cisgender. And so when I speak, I'm speaking from a perspective of a person that's passing as a cisgender white man with that privilege. But I think going forward, when talking about supporting transgender youth, we need to have them as part of the conversation, and we need to ask them how we can support them. They need to be a part of this, and so do Black trans people. Transphobia, homophobia, that is all rooted in colonialism, white supremacy, and we need those voices of color here with us to be talking about.
Appreciate that. The last question I'm going to ask you all are a little bit more about what is available in Louisville that is trans affirming, LGBTQI plus affirming. What sort of support groups, what sort of programs and services do we have in the Louisville area to support our youth, our families, our adults? I don't know who wants to go first.
I know Louisville Youth Group provides group support they have separate groups. They have one for young children, they have one for adolescents, and I believe they might even have one for young adults. I know that they have one full-time employee, and they're really struggling in terms of getting
Three.
Okay, good. The last time I talked to M, they were the only employee, and that was a couple weeks ago. So, okay, good. Thank you. You're one of them. Okay, good. But I know that they really are the place to go for support. I would say that they're the go-to, and I'm glad you're here, for trans youth. I also know that the Mandala House offers, for adolescents, they offer support. JFCS offers support for adolescents, adults, and we have the parent support group. But there are organizations. PFLAG also meets, I think, once or twice a month. There are organizations, but there's not a lot, and I think it's hard to find. So I think we could be doing better to try to find that within Louisville.
Thank you. I know you want to, anything before Stuart's going to go for sure, because he and I had this conversation.
I know, because the degree of homelessness has increased, and so that's why we.
Right, no, but we had this conversation.
Yeah.
I promised you it was coming. I promised you.
So there's a newer organization on the scene called Sweet Evening Breeze, and we provide a lot of services for LGBTQ youth, particularly LGBTQ youth that are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. So some of those programs include free HIV testing, not only free, but you get a $20 gift card if you come and get tested. We have free therapy with a gender nonconforming therapist, and a gender nonconforming and gender affirming therapist. We have our parent support group that we have every other month for parents of transgender youth. We also have a transgender support group that takes place every third Saturday of the month. So we get those. That's for 18 plus. So the demographic we serve is 18 to 24 young adults. We also have a space where young adults can come hang out. We have some clients that come in just to get away from home. We have a library with some popular fiction books, but also books surrounding identity exploration and education. We have career services and educational services, so we work with youth to get their resumes going, applications, and all that. And then, most importantly, we provide housing services and housing assistance as well. So we've just begun our hotel voucher and transportation program. So we can provide emergency housing to youth. We'll put them in a hotel for a few days, provide some case management while we work on referring them to other organizations like LYG or Youth Build or The Spot at Goodwill. And we'll provide transportation to and from the hotel or to work with some TARP passes and things like that.
Thank you. All right. This is an opportunity for you all to also have a voice. You're not wasting your time. Go ahead, Sam.
Thank you all so much for your words. I'm a therapist in a community mental health setting, and I work with several non-binary clients. And I work so hard to be even a halfway decent ally to my clients. But the struggle that I'm having is that when they walk into my office, which is not mine, I'm very, low on the power spectrum. The business staff is not getting it. I worked with county jail deputies that are better at using pronouns than these women, frankly. Other than, the reports I've made to my supervisor and trying to have the one-on-one conversations, what advice would you have, or what kind of experiences have you had with getting your admin staff on board so that the first experience a client or a patient comes in with is not being misgendered?
Do you have paper charts or electronic charts?
Electronic.
We have EMR that doesn't use the right identifiers.
I mean, I would think there's a way to make a note somewhere in the chart.
There are alerts.
Pardon?
There are alerts. in
Yeah,
big
so
capital
I mean,
letters.
I would have a meeting with your staff and say, let's say your name is Elizabeth. Well, I'm gonna call you Betty all day. I mean, just to, so they realize what it feels like. I mean, I just think you have to have a frank conversation and say, I know you don't mean to, but you're disrespecting my clients. And do you do it yourself if you can? I mean, that's just not okay. Luckily, my partners all agree with me, and my nurse practitioners, and we just hired a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and so my staff gets it, because if I hear them do it, or they would be reprimanded. I mean, so I just think you have to have a frank conversation with them.
I would actually, you go.
Okay. My partner is a therapist, a queer therapist, non-binary therapist, and they discuss this issue every single day. Every day they come home and they say, I put an alert on this person's chart, and I said, call them this name when their parents aren't around. When their parents are around, call them this name. Very detailed stuff. You do paperwork, you know how detailed it is. It has to be. And they come home and they say, my supervisor misgendered one of my clients today, and I don't know what to do. And it sounds like you're trying to have these conversations with people, which is great. And I think at the end of the day, if those conversations just simply aren't working, don't give up, but just be the good example. Sometimes a youth just needs one person on their side that they feel that understands them. And so I think the work that you're doing is great, and I'm sorry because that seems really frustrating.
Corey, or Roth?
We'll go back here first.
Yeah.
This is on. I'm also a new therapist. I just passed my certification exam, so I'm a new therapist. But I really want to serve this community. I'm part of the broader community. What I'm wondering is there like an interdisciplinary coalition in Louisville that meets regularly to discuss best practices so that we can all grow as a way of combating what's happening?
That's a great, I mean, I don't think there is, right?
There is. There used to be, and then it just restarted.
What?
There's two different groups that just restarted. There's the physicians who are in network either at Norton or at Baptist or through U of L, and then there's the mental health people that are at Mandala and are at Alsueno. Joanne Morse is there, and so they're getting together to make sure, and they put out a call to therapists around the state to come and come to this meeting. It was on April 29th at the Trans Wellness Summit, and so we had therapists that have been coming to Louisville for just this purpose. One of the workshops was caring for transgender patients. So there is now, and I can get you hooked up.
Thank you.
Would you mind forwarding that information to us as well?
Yeah.
And also, if you're looking for new patients, I'm always looking for therapists that can work with these patients, so please give me your cards.
Networking. Thank you. Thank you all very much for being here. I am cisgender, heterosexual. My husband's cisgender. I think our son, for now, is a boy as he was born. So for us, this is really, we're looking for ways.
Yeah.
I'll talk about it. We're looking for ways to make this a part of our everyday practice, not because our immediate family has this experience, but we want to just normalize the fact that this is a part of life. And it has been for a long time. I think your comment earlier about how this is rooted in colonialism and white supremacy is interesting because we know that our indigenous cultures have had a long history of, multiple identity. I think they called it, two-spirit, three-spirit. So what are things we can do aside from, including our pronouns when we introduce ourselves, making sure that toys are not aligned with a specific gender? What are other things we can do as kind of, just as allies, I guess, on the outside, to just normalize the fact that this is a part of life so that when our son does have a direct encounter, it's not a shocking moment?
Personally, I think the easiest way to do it is to teach your children to love everybody. And I think that covers it. And that different people are going to be different. And sometimes girls like girls, sometimes boys like boys. And, sometimes you could be born a girl and you feel like you're a boy, and that's okay. We treat everybody with respect. We acknowledge people where they want to be. And we don't judge. And that covers it. It is not a difficult lesson to teach children. I don't think so. Yeah, I could be wrong.
Okay, so tonight was a community chat. We have started doing these on a quarterly basis. 3 months ago, we did one on food insecurity. In 3 months, on September 5th, we're doing one on credentialing and career laddering for immigrants and refugees. So a piece on immigrants and refugees and workforce development. In the QR code, there is also an opportunity for you to give us some ideas about other community chats you would like to see us have conversations about. If your QR code is not working, I'm told that there's also a survey over on the table somewhere that you can fill that out instead. I want to thank you all. As I said before, I think this was a great conversation. I want to thank the four of you in particular for a very brave and honest and open conversation. And I really appreciate you being here. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.